Thank you for joining us. We're going to start in 1 minute. Hang in there. We're going to just give people a chance to assemble, and then we're going to start this webinar. Thank you. Good morning. We'll be starting in just half a minute, so just hang in while others join us. We'll be starting in a few moments at 11:01. It is 11:01, so we will start now. Thank you for joining us. Good morning and welcome to the webinar, Overworked and Overwhelmed, Build Your Burnout Prevention Toolkit. Yes, we're going to give you tools and life skills to prevent burnout and maintain your wellness. Hello everyone, my name is Steve Petranik and I'm the editor of Hawaii Business Magazine. This free webinar is brought to you by UHA Health Insurance, the Hawaii Health at Work Alliance, the Hawaii Employers Council, and Hawaii Business Magazine. Let me introduce our keynote speaker, Brad Stulberg. Brad conducts research and writes, coaches, and speaks on health, human performance, and well-being. His books, Peak Performance and The Passion Paradox, have sold more than 200,000 copies and been translated into more than 15 languages. Michael Story is a workplace wellness consultant at Hawaii Health at Work Alliance, a UHA health insurance company. His purpose is to live healthfully, and he shares what he learns about healthy lifestyles to inspire well-being in others. Jessica Morikone is a senior HR consultant with the Hawaii Employers Council and a busy mother of 2 young children, Ty, 8 years old, and Mia, 3. Jessica understands firsthand the current struggles of many working parents and will share her personal experiences and tips on maintaining balance. We have a lot of great ideas and tips to share, so I want to jump right in. Brad will begin with an informative presentation. Then Jessica and Michael will join Brad to dive deeper into the life skills he has presented, and then we will answer your questions as best we can. Please use the Q&A tab on your GoToWebinar dashboard to ask your questions. And towards the end of this hour, Michael will share a link to a lot of great wellness resources for you and your organizations to use. If you can't stay for the whole webinar, those handouts, both Brad's presentations and Michael's link to further resources, are in the handouts part of the dashboard. So look for that in your GoToWebinar dashboard. So Brad, please get us started.
Thanks so much, Steve, and thank you everybody for making the time to join today. As Steve mentioned, I am going to provide a brief overview on some principles to help navigate periods of burnout and disorder, which many people are feeling right now for a variety of reasons. So before I get into those principles, who am I and why should you listen to me? So as Steve mentioned, I've written 2 books, Peak Performance and The Passion Paradox. Both of those books explore the art and science of achieving a more sustainable kind of success. I'm also the co-founder of The Growth Equation, which is a multimedia platform dedicated to merging art, science, and practice of performance and well-being. In other words, I spend a lot of time thinking about these concepts. I also coach a handful of executives, entrepreneurs, and physician leaders on their own performance and well-being. So I do everything that I can to have my writing inform my coaching and to have my coaching inform my writing. So for today, 8 principles to navigate burnout and disorder. My hope is that all of you can take home at least a few of these principles and start applying them in your lives immediately. So the first principle is to stop resisting what is happening. And right now, top of mind for a lot of people is the situation with the coronavirus, as well as some of the social and political unrest in this country. I want to tell you about an experiment conducted by the psychologists Jerome Bruner and Leo Postman. They had participants view a deck of cards that had a couple of anomalous cards in there. So cards like a 6 red, 6 of spades, or a black 4 of hearts, cards that didn't belong. The participants were very briefly exposed to these cards that made no sense. Subjects that had a tendency to resist change had to be shown the cards over 40 times before they could correctly report what was happening. So when they were shown a red 6 of spades, they would report that they either saw a black 6 of spades, or even worse, they would say that I don't know what I just saw. I can't even explain. The researchers quote, subjects experienced acute distress and disorientation, even personal crises, before eventually accepting the new world and having their perception flip over after an intervening period where they were confused. So you take an experiment like this out of the lab and apply it to real life, and what it means is that when we are going through periods of change or disorder, or where quote unquote we're being asked to adjust to a new normal, the faster we can accept and start seeing reality for what it is, the better. It's almost like we're collectively going through the 5 stages of grief, right? Where you have denial, anger, bargaining, I'm forgetting the 4th, and eventually you get to acceptance. The faster that we can move to acceptance of the situation that's happening, the better. The next principle is to focus on what you can control. So for the tennis fans in the audience, you'll know who this is. For those of you that aren't tennis aficionados, it's a picture of Roger Federer, who is inarguably the best tennis player to ever live. What makes Roger Federer especially extraordinary is that he was atop of the game well into his 30s, something that was unheard of in tennis before he played. Prior to Roger Federer, most tennis players would peak in their mid to late 20s, and by the time they hit 30, they were considered dinosaurs. Roger Federer was winning championships at 36, 37, and 38. So how does this relate to disorder and burnout? So with Roger Federer, the quote unquote period of disorder that he had to experience was the natural aging process. And instead of fight against that aging process, he focused on what he could control and adapted to it. So in his case, he went from being a baseline player, which means you stand way far back from the net and run around back and forth, exerting a lot of energy, a very sound strategy for him in his youth, to being a net player, which means that you serve the ball and then you immediately go to the net. The effect of this is that the points got shorter, he had to exert less energy, and this is what allowed him to continue dominating the sport even as he got older. So all of us can identify what are these things that we can tweak and that we can control, even when things are changing in a way that we don't want them to. But like aging, there's so much change that happens that we just can't control, so we need to focus on what we can amidst those periods. The third principle is the importance of nailing daily habits. And I really like to talk about 3. The first is the importance of physical activity, regular movement. I purposefully don't use the word exercise because for many, exercise draws up images of being in a gym, which depending on where you are, lots of people can't be right now because of COVID. And even if you could be, for some people, a gym is intimidating or it's just a place that you dread. So when I think of movement, I think of everything from going on a long walk to gardening, to swimming, to cycling. And yes, if you're the kind of person that, like myself, that enjoys going to the gym too. The next big daily habit is sleep. All kinds of research shows that everything from our emotional control to our willpower to our ability to solve problems and think creatively depends on how much we sleep. You can burn the candle at both ends for a short period of time, but if you try to go too long without sleeping, eventually everything suffers. And the final daily habit is doing what you can to eat nutritious foods. There are so many diets out there. Some work for some people, others for others. My food rules are very simple. I recommend doing whatever you can within reason to avoid foods that come wrapped in plastic. It simply means avoiding processed foods. So with all of these habits, especially during a time like COVID, you can feel guilty or indulgent for doing these things. You can tell yourself a story, well, how can I make time to engage in physical activity when it feels like the world around me is ending? Or, wow, I shouldn't be sleeping 8 hours right now. I should be working late into the night to make sure my company is going to survive. Over and over again, what I have to tell coaching clients is in the short term, those strategies might work. But after a few days of releasing from these daily habits, your performance, the performance of your organization, it will all tend to suffer. The fourth principle is around the importance of sticking to routines. So, why routines? Well, during a period like the one that we're experiencing right now, it can feel like there is so much more uncertainty than we're accustomed to. Routines bring predictability to our days. They help us with the need to muster motivation. Mood follows action. What this means is that oftentimes we think that we need to feel really motivated and high energy to get going, but all kinds of behavioral science actually shows that the opposite is true. What we need to do is get going and then we feel good. Anyone that's ever been in a rut and kind of forced themselves to go to the gym or to start their day, do the laundry, empty the dishwasher, just these little behaviors can attest to the power of getting going to then feel good. And then, as I mentioned, a routine can help create a feeling of having a solid base when everything around you feels shaky. This is true at both the individual and the organizational level. So if you're an individual that feels like everything is uncertain and out of control, identifying a couple of parts of your day that are tried, worn, well tested, and you know will be there for you is so helpful because, again, it creates order amidst disorder. The same is true if you're a large employer. If your organization is going through an immense period of change, having some things that are predictable that stay the same and allow employees to fall back on those things to feel safe and secure goes such a long way to prevent burnout. The fifth principle is the importance of staying connected, which, given COVID, can be challenging, at least in the ways that we're accustomed to. So why stay connected? Study after study of resilience points to the benefits of community. We often hear about a resilient person and think that they're so strong and tough and what a heroic individual and they can bounce back on their own. But that's a false narrative. The most resilient people call for help early and often. Now, during periods of change and disorder, there can be an urge to shut down and isolate. I'm sure many people on this webinar have felt that urge. I certainly know I have. We've got to do what we can to resist that urge. When we feel like isolating and shutting down, that's the most important cue that we ought to do the opposite and reach out to others to connect, to share our struggles, and to support one another. Now you might ask, how do we do this during a period of COVID? Well, there's no research on this because we haven't had a pandemic since 1918, and we didn't have the same technology then that we have now. But what I can tell you anecdotally and from my work with coaching clients and organizations is a good rule to follow is the closer you can get to in-person connection, the better. So what that means, if you're going to email someone, consider texting them. If you're going to text someone, consider calling them. If you're going to call someone, consider a video chat. If you're going to video chat with someone, consider trying to meet safely in an outdoor space where you can distance appropriately. So the closer that we can get to being in person, the better. All right. The sixth principle is to stop thinking about change and to start thinking about adaptation instead. So there's a picture demonstrating evolution. And the overwhelming principle of evolution is this notion that successful species are very good at adapting to change. So what does that mean? Well, it means a few things. The first is that when the world around you changes, you can't just completely throw all your core values by the wayside because then you won't be you. yes, you'll change, but you'll be a completely different person, a completely different organization. In the framework of evolution, you'll be a completely different species. So you've got to have some core values, the hills that you're going to die on, that under no circumstance will you change. But outside of those core values, you want to try to be as flexible as you can on everything else. So a really good example of this are media companies in the new age. Think the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal. If these big newspapers would have said that they're not going to adapt to the digital age, without a doubt, they would be out of business. At the same time, if the newspaper said that they're going to try to become Facebook or Twitter, well, they wouldn't be newspapers anymore. What they did is they identified their core values, which for both of these papers was good investigative reporting and the dissemination of important information. Those were the things that they were not going to let go of. But they adapted in so many ways. One example I like to give is, instead of being a print newspaper, by far, both the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times get most of their readership online. Another example is podcasting. In the past, you would never think that a newspaper is also a radio show, but now the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times have two of the leading podcasts. So I think that that's a really nice example of being willing to adapt when the world around you changes, but not giving up on the core of what makes you who you are. So many other examples. I'll name one more. I won't have to go into detail. Just think about the difference between Blockbuster Video and Netflix. All right. The seventh principle is respond, not react. So the quote that I'm about to read and that is on the screen comes from a book called Man's Search for Meaning that was written by Viktor Frankl. And Viktor Frankl was a psychiatrist that was a Holocaust survivor and just endured hell in death camps for years during the Holocaust, was able to come through, and on the other side, develop this philosophy that between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies growth and freedom. So I think it's such a powerful way of viewing the world, that we can't control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. And generally, if we immediately react, the outcome is not as good as if we pause, take a minute to really think through the implications, to check our biases, to ask ourselves how we might be wrong, to step back and say, am I going to do something I regret, or is this going to be thoughtful? And then respond. So a double click on this notion of responding, not reacting. Something that I love to use with my coaching clients, because it's such a simple heuristic, is the 4 Ps. So what are the 4 Ps? Pause, process what's happening around you, make a plan, and then proceed. I ask my coaching clients, anytime something happens, whether it is a national pandemic or an email that throws them off their loop, when they feel in their body a tightness or an angst or a drive to just immediately fire back, I say 4 Ps, 4 Ps, 4 Ps. Even if this just gets you to pause for 15 seconds, that's so much better than compulsively reacting. Feedback that I got from Steve when I was sharing this concept with him offline was that it's a really good thing to keep in mind if you're in a romantic relationship too. And the final principle is perhaps the most important, and that is show up, get through, and worry about making meaning on the other side. So we're all going through a really hard time now. COVID is affecting just about everyone, some of us worse than others. Sadly, a lot of motivational speakers will say, you get growth during times of change, and you should be positive about everything and make meaning when you're in the middle of something terrible. If you're capable of doing that, great. But if you're not, don't freak out. All kinds of research shows that we tend to make meaning on the other side of challenging circumstances. And pressuring yourself to try to be positive during a really shitty situation doesn't really help yourself or anyone around you. Doesn't mean be negative, but it means don't feel the pressure to immediately be able to say, well, here's how I've grown as a result of COVID. Another one of my favorite studies came out of Harvard. There, what researchers did was they found a sample size of people that got very cold feet before their weddings. Half the participants decided to call off their wedding at the last minute. The other half of participants decided to go through with their wedding. All of these people described this 48-hour period as an absolutely terrible one. 5, 10, 15 years later, when researchers followed up with these people, the vast majority of them told very positive stories about what happened. The people that called off the wedding, by and large, said it was the best decision I made. I'm so happy that I had the guts to do it. As a result, I found new love, or I'm on my own able to travel. I would have been miserable with that person. I was so courageous to make that decision. The people that ended up going through with the wedding, they said the exact same thing. I'm so happy that I decided to marry this person. This person is the love of my life. We now have a family. Even the people that got married and then ended up getting a divorce, they still looked back on that period positively. So the point is this: when we're in the midst of a really challenging time, again, whether we're thinking as an individual or as an entire organization, there can be a tendency to want to have some kind of positive outcome immediately, or to feel like we're in charge and we figured things out. If you do feel that way, great. If you don't try to force it. Just show up, get through, and your brain will make meaning on the other side. So those are the 8 principles. I believe that this will be shared at the end, but for more information on myself or on each of these principles, you can visit my own personal website, which is www.bradstulberg.com. You can visit the growth equation, www.thegrowtheq.com, or I highly recommend that if you're on Twitter, you consider following me at @bstulberg, just like my name is spelled. I do everything that I can to make social media a not so terrible place, and ideally a good place to get tips and practices like those I shared. So with that, I am going to invite Steve and our other panelists back in for a discussion on these principles. I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to go through them, and now we're going to wrestle with them a little bit and hopefully bring them to life.
Thank you, Brad.
Steve, take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you for those 8 points. The presentation, it is live in the handout section of the dashboard. Look down there towards the bottom of the dashboard, handouts, there's 2, and there's also the link to Michael's resources, but he's going to talk a little bit about those in just a little while. So yes, Jessica and Michael, please join us on video, and we're going to dive into those points in Brad's presentation. I wanted to start with number 3, nail the daily habits. And because we've already got a question on one of those, and first my question was, one of those habits was move your body regularly. And I know when I sit for 3 hours straight or even longer, I feel awful afterwards. How often should we be moving?
So I can go ahead and take this one. The research on this is mixed. When scientists really like to go in the weeds, they say we should get up every hour, we should get up every 90 minutes, we should get up every 2 hours, we should move for 2 minutes, we should move for 5 minutes. I've looked across all these studies. Where I come out is you want to try to get up every 1 to 2 hours and move anywhere from 2 to 10 minutes. A surefire way to do this, and it's also good because it keeps you hydrated, is just to keep a bottle of water or your favorite tea nearby and drink throughout the day. You'll have to pee, and when you have to pee, you have to get up and go to the bathroom. The other time it's really helpful to move is if you feel like you're at a cognitive or creative block and you're stuck on what you're doing. The inclination there is generally to lean in and to try to solve the problem, but all kinds of research shows that our creativity is enhanced when we step away and take a little movement break. This is why you generally have your breakthrough idea, not when you're stuck at the computer trying to figure it out, but when you're on the way back from a walk around the office.
Oh, and Michael?
I was talking to a friend the other day, and he actually gave me a great tip. There's all these gadgets that will your watch or your ring or whatever you have can definitely alert you. But my friend, who's actually a bit of a neat freak, says what he does on purpose is in the morning, after he eats breakfast, he'll leave his dishes on the counter. What he also does is he'll bring his laundry out and put it beside him. And these are cues. He'll sit there and it'll bug him. And then eventually he'll have to get up and he'll go do his dishes. He does the same thing at lunch as well. So it forces him to get up. The same thing with the laundry. You know, I actually used to think, you know, so many people are working from home now. I thought maybe now I got to do the laundry because it was more of a distraction. But really, when you want to, you can flip that and think, it's really nice because it gives me that break. I can go load the laundry, I can put it in the dryer, and I can fold the laundry. And those are great breaks throughout the day that you can take.
You know, I'm going to add to that. I'm eating healthier because I'm taking breaks. Like I'm eating a smoothie every day. And that takes a little bit of time. You have to go and throw the fruit in, the bananas, you know, the liquid and everything. But I end up with a really great meal, much better than the things I used to have. I'm getting the break and I'm getting healthier food at the same time. It's stunning.
One more point to add, because I think it's really important, and I should have mentioned it in the presentation, walking meetings. So especially now when we're doing so many meetings by phone, if there's a meeting where you don't feel like you need to be there to see something, walk it. And that's a great way to get a nice burst of physical activity, to be healthy, to feel healthy, and step away from being inside your own space.
And I did that on Friday. I did have to find a place where there was less wind, though. So if you're on a phone call, look for a non-windy spot. Just another tip there. Here's a question from one of our attendees. If you're having trouble sleeping at night, what are some ways to relax and fall asleep quickly?
Yeah, I can lead off there again. So without knowing more about the situation, here's what I'd say. The first thing is to try to create some space between when you're going to go to bed and when you log off of work. Work just has a way of getting our mind racing. Even if we're not necessarily nervous or anxious about work, we love our work, but our brain gets revved up and it's hard to fall asleep when your brain is revved up. The other thing that I highly recommend is keeping all digital devices out of the bedroom. Just the mere sight of a phone or a laptop can trigger our brain into thinking about work or thinking about the next day's deadline or thinking about the phone call that we forgot to make, and none of that is really conducive to sleep. So those would be the first two things that come to mind. And then downstream, depending on the person, think about when you're consuming caffeine. If you're consuming caffeine late in the day, try to cut that out and see what happens. And the very basics on sleep that you've probably heard a million times, but I'll repeat them really quick, is cool room temperature, as dark as possible, and limit alcohol in the evening to 1 or 2 glasses. Anything to add, Mike or Jessica?
I would say don't exercise too close to bedtime as well. That'd be the one thing for me.
And for those of you who have kids out there, because that's pretty much why I'm on the panel today, because I'm not an expert in wellness like Mike or Brad are. I'm just here as kind of real life representation of you working parents out there. You're probably all exhausted like me. So I have no problem falling asleep at the end of the day. But me and my family, we do take an evening walk after dinner. And I have found that helps me at least fall asleep a little quicker. And that way you can kind of get the kids involved too. So something we've been doing.
I'm glad you brought up parenting. So real quick, so I came to speak to the Alliance, I don't know, 3 years ago. I had written this book called Peak Performance. At the time, I had no kids. Now I've got a 2.5-year-old. And a lot of people came up to me and they said, oh, you're living the dream. Wait till you have a kid. So here's what I'll say. You do still want to try to nail sleep, but I've changed my thinking a little. Now what I'll say is that the first rule of sleep is to get sleep. The second rule of sleep is don't beat yourself up if you don't get sleep. Because a lot of time it's the worrying about, oh, now I can't fall asleep. I'm not going to be on my game tomorrow, or I'm up in the middle of the night. I'm never going to be able to fall back to sleep. The worrying about not sleeping is almost worse than the not sleeping itself. So I think it's really important to like embrace the duality of this, or excuse me, the non-duality of this, and really do everything you can to get sleep. But if it's not working out, forget about it. Don't beat yourself up. Try again the next night.
Yeah, and the last thing I would add is just because you feel tired and you fall asleep quickly, don't equate that to good sleep. So you still need that routine to go down for the night and actually get good sleep, get that REM and that deep sleep and the light sleep that you need. Otherwise, sometimes you can just become restless at night and you don't even really realize it.
Here's a couple of tips from a guy who used to work for newspapers and therefore had a lot of strange hours. Long's Draperies will sell you blackout curtains. They will come to your home, measurement, do all this work for you, and install them. Their prices are decent. Yes, Long's Draper will give you blackout curtains that will make your room dark. And if you can't get that done, go to Walgreens, buy their eye shades. The ones, you know, that cover you up. You see people wearing them on planes so they can sleep on a well-lit plane. It will also help in your bedroom when you have to sleep and maybe your hours do not let you sleep when it's dark. Thank you to all of you. Let's go on to the next one, which was Brad's point number 4, which was stick to routines. And I'm just going to play a bit of a devil's advocate. It seems counter to other advice we're hearing during the pandemic, which is you have to innovate or die. The old ways may not work anymore, and we have to pivot. Brad, how do you speak to that?
So there's a lot of nuance here, and I think you know, Steve, you're maybe answering the question in the way that you asked it, is that I don't necessarily think that it's either or. So I think that we often love black, white, this or that, but so many of these things are gray. So routines, to me, it's really about how do you successfully adapt, because that's what we're talking about here. So it's being willing to go off your routine and to change and to innovate, but at the same time knowing that if you try to do that without any base, it's probably not going to be sustainable. Whether we're talking about a human species or an organization, living systems like to have some stability. Doesn't have to mean that you're not going to change anything and be rigid. That stability could be your morning walk and your evening cool down time with your family. It could be the half an hour that you spend reading every day at lunch, right? These are small things that provide a sense of stability throughout the day.
Jessica, I know you as a parent have to depend on routines and boundaries while working at home. Tell us how you're coping with Ty and Mia and your hubby and your job all from home.
Yeah, you know, that's a good question, Steve. A lot of it, I think, for me, boils down to setting expectations. So at least for me, it's really helpful because when, you know, my kids or my husband see me at home, they think I'm in mommy mode, right? That's normal, and I don't blame them for doing that. But they forget that mommy's also trying to work a full-time demanding job. So that does take adjustment and reminders. We're trying to build new habits, right, with the kids, so they know they might not be getting up and going off to school every morning like they used to, but we do have, you know, some structure around how we, you know, get up, eat breakfast, get set up, and then I might have to remind them, right, mommy has an important call for the next hour, and I'll be looping back with you. And I know some of my parent friends out there I've been seeing on social media, you know, they put signs up on their door like do not disturb, I guess whatever it takes there as well. And, you know, work too. I think part of that for me is letting my team know what to expect of me. So, you know, I am available to respond to emails between 8 and 5, but maybe if they need me beyond that, because that's family time for me, I have to let them know that. And, you know, that's twofold. It's one, so they know what to expect of me, but I also think it really helps to lift the burden off of me and my own expectations of myself, that I really need to be on and responding 24/7. So a lot of it, I think, in adapting is, you know, setting expectations and communicating alongside having kind of a new routine with it. So it's a little bit of a blend. I love how Brad framed that for us.
Right. Michael, here's a you know, a fitting exercise and movement into your life from our audience. Says I attend webinars on my treadmill. Are there any other ways to sort of mix and match those things, getting your exercise in and getting your work done? I love that. I attend webinars on my treadmill.
You know, one of the things we do at UHA, and my boss, Val Davison, is great at this. She'll set it up ahead of time. She says, guys, this is going to be a walking meeting. Get off Zoom, put in your AirPods, and let's walk when we meet. It's great to see people face to face always, but look at our team, we always see each other. So every now and again, change it up, have a walking meeting.
Oh, there's a lot. We're getting lots of smart tips from our audience members. Here's one about sleep. Don't stress on whether your hours of sleep are consecutive. What matters is how many hours of sleep are in a 24-hour period. I can speak to that personally. I'll go to sleep and then I'll wake up in the middle of the night for 2 hours. I'll get some things done and then I'm able to go back to sleep and get my 8 hours, but it's not within an 8-hour frame. It's within more like a 10-hour frame. And working from home makes that a lot easier than it used to be when I had to be in the office at a certain time. So I'm going to go on to Brad's next point, which is the fifth one, stay connected. And that's so hard for all of us now because many of us are working from home rather than a shared office. And I'm going to focus on this part. There's our non-work friends and everything, and that's really hard. But I want to about connecting with our colleagues for now. And I know it's hard staying connected when you have an existing team, but it's even harder when you're bringing on board new team members and they haven't met the whole team in person at once before. You mentioned, Brad, about bringing it up a level, going from a phone call to a video chat and maybe a social distancing in person. Any other thoughts on staying connected from Brad or any of our panelists?
I would just say that also, particularly if you're leading an organization, you know, Jessica mentioned setting expectations as far as it goes with being a working parent, but also as being a leader, right? So if you're onboarding someone virtually, it's not going to be as smooth as if you're onboarding them in person. And pretending it is just going to frustrate everybody involved. So I think that it's really important to say, hey, we're doing the best we can. And if we can get 80% of the experience, well, then that's going to have to do right now. Because if you try to get 100% of an onboarding experience in the virtual environment, I think all parties just end up frustrated. Everyone's going through this. I coached the CEO of a 1,000 person company that just brought on a new COO without having ever met the person. My client said that 6 months ago, he would have told me that he has absolutely gone off his rocker to hire a COO without ever meeting the person, but here we are.
Yeah, we're all adapting.
One thing I'd add to that as well, you know, when we're working from home, it can also breed some uncertainty. And Jessica brought up a really good point about setting expectations in the communication. With my boss, we set up a scheduled touch base 4 times a week, which can seem excessive to some people because those are scheduled. Those aren't the ad hoc touch bases that we always have. But what I can say is this, those touch bases aren't, are you hitting your numbers? Where are you with your numbers? Where are you with the presentation? Or you get everything done you need to get done? A lot of those are just asking, how are you doing? How are your kids? How is your family? How can I help you? So Val does a great job of uplifting me every single time I talk to her. It's knowing those social determinants of health, right? Where that person is in their personal life and how that could potentially affect the job. So when you're doing these touch bases, it doesn't have to be about work all the time. You do need to understand your employees and the challenges that they have.
And that's a message to all you intense people who are like me. When you start a conversation, it's all about when is this going to be available and what are we going to do next on this? And I've got to remember the 4 Ps that Brad outlined. First, I'm going to pause. And yes, like Michael says, I'm going to say, how are you doing? How was your weekend? And really mean it rather than just be pro forma about it. So I'm still learning. This old dog is still trying to learn some new tricks. We're still getting, everybody loves the sleep tips. So we're still getting some more. Someone mentions that if you can't afford Wong's drapery, that Costco has blackout curtains. Maybe not as nice, but they do the trick. So some more, please, yes, for those of you who are watching this this webinar, please offer us your tips because this is very much a crowdsourcing thing. We're all trying to figure this out as we go along. So let's go on to another one of Brad's points, which is respond, not react. And this is one, you know, thank you, Brad, for mentioning that respond, not react is a great way to counter our implicit biases, because you know, it allows us to pause and see, are we making a stereotypical response based on the way this person looks, the color of their skin, their gender, their high school. That's a great thing. We judge people in Hawaii by their high school, and we need to stop doing that, because people are people, and they need to be judged on their actions and who they really are. So a bit more, maybe if you can, Brad, bring up those 4 Ps page so we can all see them again.
Yeah,
They
let's
are,
do it. Here we go.
yeah, pause,
Let me share my
process,
screen.
plan,
So
and proceed.
I'm struggling to figure out here how to share the screen, but they're just that. They're pause, process, plan, and proceed.
So can you, you know, I'm seeing how all these things connect. If we don't get exercise or we don't get movement, we're so on edge that we don't pause, we don't plan and process, we go right to action. And so we need to get all of these things working together. We need to get the sleep so we can think and pause. And all these things are really interconnected.
Yeah, they are. And I think that the hardest part about the 4 Ps for most people is just that initial pause. So to your point about implicit bias, yes, implicit bias is often based on gender, race, high school. I guess if you're in Hawaii, I'm in North Carolina. It's much more, are you from Western North Carolina or Central North Carolina? But we all have these things. But it can also be implicit bias just about patterns. So we assume that, oh, I've been in this situation with this person before, it always goes this way. And that doesn't have to be the case. So 2 questions that I like to ask myself during those pauses are, how might I be wrong? And don't just pay lip service to it, but really like answer that question, because a good, rigorous, thoughtful thinker can debate both sides of the argument. And then the second question I like to ask myself is if and this is especially powerful if you're in what feels like an emotionally charged or stressful situation, is if a close friend were in this situation, what advice would I give that close friend? Because we're often so much more clear-headed when we're giving a friend advice than when we're giving ourselves advice. I once worked with an elite athlete that had this habit of whenever she got injured, she would try to train through it and just end up even injured worse. So she'd be hobbling out the door with a strained hamstring to get her workout in because she felt like, oh, I'm falling behind if I don't do it. I'm going to call this person Rachel. It's not her real name. One day I said, Rachel, if one of your training partners had just strained their hamstring and was hobbling out the door on day 2 to try to do a really fast workout, what would you tell them? And she's like, I tell them just wait another day. The world's not going to end. It's much better to take one more day off than to push really hard and injure yourself. That's a prime example of where we give better advice to a friend than we give ourselves. You're about to respond to that email and meet it with equal, if not escalating hostility. Well, what would you tell your brother? Would you say, yeah, you should respond immediately and aggressively? Or would you say, hey, you're angry right now, you're tired, sleep on it, come back to it tomorrow? So the more that we can give that advice to imaginary friends and then take it ourselves, the better.
I love that. Love that. More great tips from our audience. Here's someone who embraces naps, and I know there's some people who feel that some evidence that naps will interfere with your nighttime sleep, but on the other hand, Winston Churchill got through World War II with very little sleep because he apparently took naps in the middle of the day. Here's another one. Try journaling if you have a hard time falling asleep. Get your thoughts down and out of your head. And that speaks, yeah, it speaks to me because oftentimes when I wake up in the night and I can't get back to sleep, it's because I haven't unburdened things. I'm racing through either problems at work or other situations. And here's a tip on that. Don't spend your whole waking hours with either your headphones in, listening to music, podcasts, and everything. You need some time for your brain to unwind, you know, whether it's in the shower, shaving in the morning, cooking. Sometimes turn off the stimulus and just let your mind wander. I know it might be a little boring, but it helps you process your thoughts so you don't end up processing at 4 in the morning.
2 other transformative tips, because sleep is really seeming to to resonate with a lot of people, or maybe lack thereof. So in addition to unloading or unburdening your mind before falling asleep, if you're someone that wakes up in the middle of the night with like an aha moment, sleep with a little notepad by your bed. So that way you can write it down. A, you unload the burden of trying to remember it in the morning, or the stress, what if I'm going to forget it? B, you don't reach for your phone, because you can tell yourself with the best intentions that you're just going to pull up the notepad on your phone and write down your thought. I bet 99% of you end up checking your email, checking your text messages, checking your social media, and next thing you know, you've been up for a half an hour. Very much related to that, try to do what you can to keep the phone out of your bedroom. As we get older, myself included, we have to pee in the middle of the night. If every time you pee, you're pulling up your phone, not only are you exposing yourself to a lot of blue light, which throws your body's sleep hormones out of whack, but you're also exposing yourself to the stress of work, of the news cycle, whatever it is that you're looking at. Whenever I talk about this, people always say, well, I use my phone for my alarm clock. You can get on Amazon like a $4 alarm clock. There's not a better $4 investment if that helps you get your phone out of your bedroom.
And I always like to provide advice for people who ignore good advice, and that is, so Apple has a function called Night Shift on its devices where you can change the coloring so there's less blue light. I don't know what this.
It's a crutch. It's a crutch. I'm pushing back already.
Yeah.
So the blue light is definitely part of the problem, and it's scientists love to harp on it because it's really interesting, and people in technology love to harp on it because they want you to be on those screens 24/7. But more and more research is pointing to not being the blue light that keeps you up, but being the fact that you're checking what the president is tweeting at 2 in the morning that keeps you up. And we have proof of that because most people can watch a television show and unwind and fall asleep with no problem. Most people cannot be answering work emails or on social media and fall asleep no problem.
So one of the things I'll add to what you guys are talking about, and actually going back to that original statement that you made, Steve, about sleep, raising my daughter, I certainly know that sleep begets sleep, right? The more naps they took, the better they slept at night, the better that I slept at night. So take your naps for sure. The power naps, 15, 20 minutes during the day are rejuvenating. The other thing I would say is when you talk about the work-life balance and trying to get off, Brad makes a great point in his book, The Passion Paradox, which is be self-aware. It's not necessarily a work-life balance, which it is, but being self-aware of what you're doing and when you actually do need to unplug.
Mm-hmm. Jessica, all these things apply to family life. I've become a better manager because I was a parent, and I can see, and I know my employees are not my kids. But so many of the things that we've been talking about, we're talking about them for work, but they apply to home life.
Yes, absolutely. When we talk about the concept of respond without reacting, I love that because I know, we talked about it and Brad really honed in on it really well on how it applies more in the workplace. In my mind, I really automatically connected to home. And that pause is so important. And for me, I guess, if I had one thing to share with folks that helps me, it would be how big a role perspective plays for me. No matter how much or little that I have on my plate any given week, really the number one driver in how well my week goes is how I feel about my week. So that pause, before I react and freak out or have that moment or that meltdown or scream at my kids, is super important for me to kind of check myself with perspective, because it's so easy to see work or home duties as a burden. I recently read an article in the Washington Post, and it was on the late Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it was basically about how she's this model for all working moms. And, in it, the article really emphasized her philosophy that each part of her life really gave her respite from the other. And that, RBG was better at what she did because she was a mom, not despite it. So, for me, that was a really good reminder that each side of my life equation feeds the other. Without one, I couldn't really fully appreciate the other. So I really love that pause concept. I really try to be present. I really try to stay grateful and do whatever it takes, to keep me there, which I know you guys have talked already about some great tips. Social media, I like to follow inspirational social media type outlets. You know, some of my favorites are like Alice Inoue from Happiness U. I also really like Humans of New York. They do great storytelling on that IG account too. But just to really kind of keep me in the grateful mindset, so I do pause before I react or have a moment at home. You know, that really does help me stay balanced.
Oh, cool, cool. Well, you know, I've been reading the Harry Potter books since my kids were young. I probably read them about 7 times. They are like comfort food for me. So when I need something, I know what's going to happen. There's no tension in it. I don't know what it is, but I continue to come back to them because I know it's going to turn out in the end. So that's wonderful. Why I like that. But going back to our questions, and I keep looking to my left because that's where I have the questions on a separate screen, and people are really engaged here. So I'm going to go to some of these. Brad, this speaks to your accept your situation, and our attendee says the accept your situation has been my preferred MO, but I've heard advice that to help mental well-being, we should think of this as temporary. Do you find this actually reinforces bad, unhealthy behavior? It's okay if I don't sleep. This is only for now. Can you speak to this?
Oh, that is such a strong insight. So I think that it's another one of these instances of both and. A mindset like that, this is temporary, it's okay if I don't sleep for now, is really helpful until it's not. Right? So if you're off of 1 or 2 weeks of not sleeping, this is temporary. If I don't sleep for an hour, it's okay. Totally fine. If you're a new parent, maybe you're in that mindset for 6 months. Guess what? It's not going to change, and you're much better reminding yourself that it's temporary. This is what's happening right now, than freaking out about the fact that you're not sleeping. If your kid's 7 years old and sleeping through the night, and you're still telling yourself the same story that you can't sleep because you have a kid, then you're using that story as a way not to really explore how you can change your habits to try to get better sleep. And you can say that for everything. Exercise. This is such a tough period. It's a really hard time at work. I can't exercise for the next week. You know what? Sometimes that is 100% true and the right thing to do. But if every week becomes, oh, things are so hard, I can't get my movement in, then it's a problem. So I really think it's one of those cases of it depends. Is COVID temporary? Yes, this will pass. Other generations endured World War I, World War II, the Vietnam War. So this is a challenge that we're facing right now. Eventually it will pass. And I think we owe ourselves the grace to say, well, it is really hard right now, and it is what's happening, and we can do the best that we can while giving ourselves some leeway, knowing that this is a completely abnormal time.
Another question here, Brad, again for you, Brad, as someone who works with people who perform at a high level, do you find that high performers have a bigger sense of purpose? Are they more passionate about their purpose in life and their meaning and what they're seeking? So
in general, yes. I think that you want to be passionate about what you do. You want to have a big sense of purpose. I mentioned this quite a bit the first time that I came and spoke with you all a couple of years ago, that there is lots of research that shows that particularly when the going gets tough, individuals who are purpose-driven tend to have an easier time enduring. They tend to feel less fatigue and be less likely to burn out. So unequivocally, purpose is a good thing. I will say that lots of very high performers also suffer from periods of depression. And a mainstay of depression is feeling like you have a loss of purpose. So it's, again, this polarization or this dichotomy that having a purpose is really good, but if you lose that for a period of time, don't beat yourself up about it, because beating yourself up only makes you feel worse, except that you might just be going through a period where you're feeling a little bit rudderless, and that's okay. And of course, if you're really in a hole, you want to do what you can to seek professional help. But I hedge when I talk about purpose, because it is something that I see in high performers, is that they're super purpose-driven, and they're so purpose-driven that even if they feel like they're losing that purpose for a week or two, it can send them spiraling into depression. So it's the kind of thing that you want to have, but you also want to hold loosely.
Michael, you have a link to that's in the handouts. Can you talk about that link to the wellness resources that you're sharing with our audience?
Sure. Would you like me to share my screen now,
Yeah,
Steve?
that'd be great. Yeah.
Yeah, let me.
And while Michael's getting that up, it's in the handouts. So if you go to your GoToWebinar dashboard, you can see it there. Handouts is one of the last things towards the bottom, and there's both Brad's presentation and Michael's link to resources. So go ahead, Michael.
So let me know when you can see my screen, Steve.
Yeah, we can see it now.
It looks great.
Okay. So free resources at workwell.hhawa.com/COVID-19. This is, I always call it our hub for a healthy lifestyle. We have a ton of free resources about mental wellness and specifically to burnout as well, and things that we've discussed today. So I encourage everybody to definitely go to that website and filter through it. It's very easy. If you have any trouble at all trying to find what you're looking for, you have my number, 522-5572. That's my direct line. Please give me a call. You can also email at workwell@hhawa.com. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you. And so, yeah, that link, if you don't want to write it down, it's there in the dashboard, and you can click on it, and it'll take you to the link. Some more things from our audience. First, I'm going to mention some other tips. I guess again, sleep is a big issue. Use a real notepad. I'm not sure what that is. A real paper. That's what they're talking about. They're talking about this sort of thing. Don't pick up the phone to write a note. I guess that's in the middle of the night. Leave the TV out of the bedroom. That's another one. Here's RBG, that's Ruth Bader Ginsburg, said her philosophy is never to respond in anger. Very good advice. You know, and here's someone, I don't know how parents are navigating these times. I just want to offer my admiration and support to Jessica and all parents, and I will add mine to that. My kids are 22 and 30, thank God. If they were Jessica's age, I would not be doing this. My hair would be all gray. I would be falling asleep because I wouldn't be getting any, but all those things would happen. So congratulations, Jessica. Good luck on that. Here's another question. How can employers support their employees' mental health during this time? Michael, do you want to start with that one?
Yeah, I'll take that. I think, you know, in our last webcast, which was on mental wellness, burnout's definitely part of mental wellness. There were 6 steps you could follow specifically, and you'll find them at that resource page that I showed. But specific to 3 of those steps, which you can implement very quickly, the best thing to start is to educate. People just have to know what burnout is, what the symptoms are. I've provided in our resource page also a quick assessment that you can take. It has specific questions to burnout. It will give you a score at the end, and it'll actually help you interpret that score too. So to help people within your workforce, please educate them. Allow that safe space where they feel like they can connect with their supervisor or coworker to talk about it, and absolutely make sure that your coworkers know the resources are available and where to go to get help.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is just normalize. No one comes into work and is scared to tell their colleagues that they've got a sore throat or, you know, they're coming off the flu. Well, if you're going through a rut, you shouldn't be scared to say, hey, I'm feeling real down today. Or if you're out 2 weeks because you're someone that experiences depression and you're in a stage of depression, you shouldn't have to feel scared to say that. So if you are a leader in an organization, the more you can normalize, the better. Because more people this year will suffer from depression than will get the flu, assuming we all get our flu vaccines.
Yep, and we always talk about leaders showing that vulnerability that they need to. The leaders do need to participate and empathize and show folks that it affects them as well, and to be able to talk through those things.
You know, we're almost out of time, but there's this one great question, and it's might be from a parent. I hope you have resources on the wellness site for how to manage your kids' screen time, and maybe Jessica has some thoughts on that, because your kids are already required to have screen time to learn right now, and how do you manage it? And I know in my when my kids were young, TV was a crutch. You know, we need to get something done, so we plopped them in front of the TV, and we knew that was not the greatest thing for them to be sitting there in front of the TV. And now it's a computer, or it's a laptop, or it's you know, an iPad. Thoughts on that, Jessica? Managing your kids' screen time.
I mean, they always say don't bribe your kids too, and I bribe my kids all the time. I guess part of it is, you know, yes, it's good to have healthy boundaries, but I guess for me, I think alongside what Brad has said, be kind to yourselves. Sometimes you need to have boundaries, but you also need to flex on the boundaries a little if it's gonna mean that you're gonna stay sane for that day. So admittedly, I'm not the best about, you know, keeping my kids completely away from TV or iPad. It's honestly been part of my saving sanity alongside that occasional glass of wine and my Star Wars binging, right, on Netflix. But you know, I think my message would be, at least for myself, what's worked for me is, yes, have some boundaries, but be kind to yourself, because, you know, you got to do what you got to do. It's survival mode right now, guys.
100%. You can fall in love with an idea such as no screen time, but don't marry it.
Thank you, Brad. Thank you for making me feel better.
Daniel Tiger for the win. My guy's 2.5. So Daniel Tiger, if every adult watched Daniel Tiger, our country would be on a better track. It's like a therapy session for a 2.5 to 4-year-old.
My daughter's 17, and she showed me this great app she found, and she uses it. It's absolutely amazing. She's a baker, and she said, Dad, I found this app. It's called Bake Shop. I'm like, that's pretty cool. She says, yeah, no, but take a look at it. You can actually, it's a game, so they've gamified screen time, and she'll bake through this game on the app. And when whatever she's baking is ready to go into the oven, a timer pops up. That's going to take 45 minutes to bake, and her screen goes black, and she can't touch her phone for 45 minutes. It's like self-medicates, yeah. So it's a really cool app.
That is so cool. Well, thank you to all of you. This has been a great discussion. Thank you to our audience. You've supplied great questions. Thank you for spending your time with us. Sadly, we've run out of time. Don't forget to download Brad's presentation and the link to Michael's resources that's there in the handout section. Thank you to all of you panelists for a great job. Thank you to all of you for attending. This free webinar has been brought to you by UHA Health Insurance, the Hawaii Health at Work Alliance, Hawaii Employers Council, and Hawaii Business Magazine. Aloha, have a great day.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.